Hi everybody, Joshua here, broadcasting from the home office, and I have a special Dvar Torah for Shabbat Chazon, the last Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. I apologize for my more than normal scruffy appearance, but that is the cost of the 3 weeks. This is a Dvar Torah entitled A Lone Question. Mi ma'amakim kraticha Hashem. From the depths I call out to you, O Lord. This coming Shabbat, we reach the lowest of the low. After 3 weeks of deprivation, concentrating, and shrinking our lives down, we reach the moment when our memory crests, and what we have lost comes to a head. Shabbat Chazon, the last Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, sets the stage for us to delve into those depths of memory and loss. We already begin to hear the strains of lamentation filter through the air as we change the normal Haftorah trope to match Eicha's mode of mourning. Not only that, but even the title word of that book shows up, not just in the special Haftorah chosen intentionally by the rabbis, but the word Eicha is even found in this week's Parsha, which always precedes the fast, Devarim. In Chazon Yeshayahu, Isaiah's vision, the special Haftorah for this Shabbos, we see the word Eicha appear in a context almost identical to that found in the Book of Lamentations. But we'll get to that later. For now, let's look at the preceding verses that God has set out before invoking that word Eicha. In these verses, God makes a condition, a Tanai, which maps to the precedent established by Moses' negotiation with Reuven and God in this past week's Parsha, in which both positive commitment and potential consequence are detailed. If you agree and hear, then you will eat the good of the land, but if you refuse and rebel, you will eat only the sword. Isaiah 19-20. This Haftorah completes the special 3 prophetic readings called the Tlat de Puranuta, commonly translated as the 3 of punishment, but the Hebrew root pei resh ayin doesn't mean to punish necessarily, it means to repay, like one who satisfies the conditions of a debt. It's a word of fairness, in which one gets what is coming to you. While the prophecies we read in this period are pervaded with a sense of gloom, they are not oracles of doom, but rather opportunities to take notice and take responsibility. In Amos 3:7, the prophet calls out that the Holy One does nothing without having revealed God's purpose. The Malbim insists that this is not only a warning, but a promise. One should never look at a prophecy as if it is already foretold. A prophecy is not a prediction of how things will be, but rather a warning of how things are going. The prophecy is the communication of the consequences of the choices we have made, and God is asking us to pay attention. So what was the condition that God was negotiating? In an astounding turn of phrase, God, through the mouth of Isaiah, shifts from unilateral commands to the vocative, which is the fancy grammatical term for the invitation, in which God invites not just obedience, but collaboration. Come, let us reach an understanding, asks God. And in a verse we see over and over again on Yom Kippur. If your sins are like crimson, they will be white like driven snow. If they are dyed a deep red, they can become like fleece. This promise reinforces that prophecy is not a function of fate or fortune, but rather of freedom. No matter how bad things have gotten, how deep we've gone, there is never a moment in which change is not possible, in which we are able to take our lives in our hands and shape it into something better. On this image, the Mitsudat David writes, "Sin is compared to a red stain, specifically because it is a color that leaves a seemingly indelible mark, not able to be removed through mere laundering." This commentary relates the metaphor to anyone who has accidentally spilled a glass of wine on their Shabbos tablecloth. You've sprinkled the salt, you've splashed the seltzer, but that stain is not going away. Feel that frustration and regret. Imagine it's an heirloom, now lost or ruined. Feel that. But that is the power of God's forgiveness. That is the power of teshuvah, that one can always be restored. Now, we finally come to the appearance of the word Eicha in our Haftorah. Drawing on the same imagery that opens the book of Lamentations, Isaiah cries out, "Alas, she has become a hustler, that once faithful city. It was filled with justice, where righteousness lodged, but now it is rife with murderers." Rashi lasers in on the curious verb of to lodge, in reference to righteousness's relation to the city. He explains that before, capital cases were allowed to rest overnight if there were no sufficient defense, so that the judges could get a fresh look in the morning, in case there were something they missed that would spare this person's life. This is an astonishing comment, because one may have thought that the Sanhedrin, in its golden years, allowed more murderers to live because they did everything they could to avoid their execution. But no, it's not the accused murderers, criminals, that are the murderers cited in this verse, but the judges themselves. Their crime is that they have become too zealous, not for justice, but for vengeance, for punishment. The tragedy marked by the word Eicha, alas, is the corruption of the ideal of who we were supposed to be, a city on a hill, a beacon of light to the nations. But now our hands are stained red with the blood of the innocent. As mentioned above, Eicha shows up astonishingly in Parshat Devarim as well, which always, without fail, is the final Torah reading before Tisha B'Av. Here, Moses reaches the latest of his limits, as the feeling of strain bearing the people solo, especially after the passing of his siblings, overtakes him. How, Eicha, can I bear the strain of you without help, the burden with your challenge? Anyone who has felt the pressure of leadership or of responsibility for others has, I am sure, felt this frustration at some point. What I want to focus on here is Moses' use of the word Eicha. Whereas above, in Isaiah, the word is correctly translated as alas, here, Eicha is brought back to its literal meaning, how. That question is at the heart of the word's marking of tragedy. How is the saddest question word we have, as it so commonly implies the isolation of the questioner, reaching out. Moses cries out for help as he bears the burden of the people alone. God tried inviting us to participate, to collaborate, but ends up abandoned. Ibn Ezra, in his comment on the verse in Isaiah, underscores the sting within the question. The prophet has reproved them, but they have not listened. What was once a solid partnership has now become a relationship of mere exchange. The real tragedy marked by the word Eicha is not, in a way, the coming destruction, but the loneliness at the heart of the question. In his book on the Parsha, the 19th century Hasidic master Avraham Yoshua Heschel of Apt, the Ohev Yisroel, makes a brief gnomic comment on the Shabbos before the worst day in the Jewish year. He writes, "One could say Shabbat Chazon is the greatest Shabbat of the year, and that there is no greater holiday than Tisha B'Av." How in the world could anyone say this? How could anyone think this? I don't mind confessing to you in this video. Tisha B'Av is so hard. It's such a challenging day. You feel the heaviness of it approach you. You feel the difficulty of it in advance. The 3 weeks really do their job. So how could the Ohev Yisroel say Tisha B'Av, Shabbat Chazon are the greatest days of the year? Astonishing. As justification, the Ohev Yisroel cites an obscure halacha that on the day one spouse leaves for an extended period, they're obligated to ensure that their partner is taken care of. He, too, marks the absence and isolation at the heart of this tragedy, which we recall each and every year. While the loneliness was felt by God in the Haftorah and by Moses in Devarim, here we sit in the wake of what has been taken from us, the miracle of the temple, and the felt presence of the divine. It's us now who feel that loneliness. It's us who feel that isolation. The Ohev Yisroel sees the promise tucked in the heart of the darkness, that there is a reconnection that has been pledged to us, that God is obligated to fulfill. So perhaps we can see this absence not just as something missing, but as a vacuum, which draws us back in. After all, objects at a distance have a gravitational force between them. This Shabbat is the greatest Shabbat of the year because it is the one that we can finally heed God's call, for us not only to listen, but to collaborate, to finally take responsibility and commit ourselves to the Word. We drove out the divine when we chose our convenience over justice. To bring harmony to this world of dissonance, we need to take note of how far we are, how deep we've gotten, and to see that distance no longer as absence, but as space that, through our commitment to justice, can be filled once more with the divine. Shabbat Shalom.